All right, so when people talk about an MPC, I think the typical way to think about it is, you know, this is a sampler, a sequencer, you can make beats, you can make any type of music within an MPC, that's great. But guess what? There's other samplers out there that you could also do music and they do a great job at it. But where I feel like the MPCs separate themselves from anything else that I've seen out there is when you turn it around and see the backside of an MPC, the inputs, the outputs that they offer. I have the MPC Live Mark II right here, and the MPC Live Mark II has 6 outputs. They only have 2 inputs. I wish and I hope if AKAI ever makes a new MPC, they could put also 4 inputs and 4 outputs. If you're new to the MPC and you're probably questioning like, why would I want those outputs? Like, what are they good for? Well, stick around. In this video, I'm going to explain and show how we're going to use those outputs to not only just sample and make beats on an MPC, but to take your production a step further when it comes down to mixing and also designing certain sounds that you're sampling. Right behind me, right here, you will see I have all different guitar pedals from UAD. I mean, these are all of the guitar pedals from UAD. I'm not going to be reviewing each and every one of them because this would be a very long video, but I do want to show you guys the power of the MPC, the beauty of an MPC, not just the MPC Live Mark II, but the MPC One, is that AKAI keeps releasing updates that just make these machines a lot more powerful. Now you can connect a class compliant interface to your MPC to expand your inputs and outputs. Right next to me, I have an Apollo Volt, which there is 4 physical inputs and 4 physical outputs. But right underneath this MPC, I have the UAD Apollo. This is actually the first Apollo that they ever released. The very first one, I picked it up, and I don't know how many years ago that was, but this has 8 inputs and 8 outputs. Now, keep in mind, this one is not class compliant, so I'm not able to hook this up to the MPC via USB or anything like that. But since the MPC Live Mark II has physical outputs, I am using the 6 outputs on the back of my MPC to hook it up into the inputs of my UAD Apollo, treating my UAD Apollo as the console. I'm obviously using the console application. I will show you guys how I have all this routed in just a few minutes. Now, before I do dive in any further, I do want to talk about signal flow. Signal flow is very important because if you understand signal flow of whatever audio in general, any machine, sampler, mixer, whatever you're doing audio-wise, everything's gonna make sense. Signal flow right here, we have the AKAI MPC Live Mark II, has 6 outputs. I am coming out of the 6 physical outputs, going to the inputs of the Apollo interface. And now this is where I say the MPC separates itself from anything else I've seen. When you push this button, the mixer button, you go into your mixer, you don't only have plugins to start mixing your music with EQs, compressors, reverbs, delays, but you also have buses. Like, this is wild. I come from Pro Tools, and when I'm mixing in Pro Tools and I want to incorporate outboard gear, I'll use certain buses to send out of my interface into compressors, EQs, and bring it back into my console. So the way I'm doing this whole setup is on track 1, I have my sample. And my sample is stereo because I'm sampling in stereo, so I'm coming out of outputs 1 and 2. Going into inputs 1 and 2 of my UAD console app. And then if I jump over to track 2 is my drums. My drums, I always have my drums in mono. I don't like to pan my hi-hats. I mean, it's just a personal preference. So since it's in mono, I'm gonna come out of outputs 3. As you can see right there, it's just outputs 3, which is gonna be this red cable right here. This is coming out of output 3, going into the Apollo input 3. And then if I go into track 3, I have my lead synthesizer, and that's pretty much it. When I make beats, I've said this before, but I usually just use a sample, drums, bass, and maybe a lead. So I'm not really using 10 tracks to make a beat on the MPC. Realistically, 8 outputs or 4 outputs is more than enough for me. Now here on the UAD Apollo, right here we have input or channel 1. I actually have it in stereo. I link these 2 channels together. I have inputs 1 and 2, which is my sample, and I could link those together. So it's right here, 1 and 2. If we actually solo the sample, I'm actually gonna put on my headphones. And also, if I solo my drums, since they're in mono, we should hear them in channel 3. And then on on the third track, I have a lead synthesizer, which is coming out of outputs 4, which should be in track 4 within my console application. And then 5 and 6 is available. I'm not using 5 and 6 yet. If I want to add other instrument plugins, I can put those out of outputs 5 and 6. I just have them there ready for whenever I'm going to use them. That's why I say 4 outputs is good enough for me, but if we can have 8, that'd be awesome. But 4 outputs is great. And now, looking over here on the console application, we have inputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have 7 and 8. 7 and 8 is not being used. That's where we're bringing in these guitar pedals. These guitar pedals, I'm using the sends. The Apollo interface has sends 1 through 8, so I'm coming into input 7 and 8. So 7 and 8, I'm actually going to rename this and just put it, I'm actually going to name it guitar pedal. Cool. This is going to be my guitar pedal. So whatever I'm bringing back in that I'm processing through my guitar pedal is going to come into inputs 7 and 8. Now, here's the wild part, and this is why I'm using a UAD Apollo. I think UAD, I mean, I don't know how it is with other interfaces, but UAD has their plugins. Their plugins, you can obviously bring in, this is a Cambridge EQ that I really love using, but you got 1176s, you got this Ampex 102. You could put these plugins within your mix. This is a console, an actual, I mean, it's digital, but to me, it's a physical console because I'm running plugins with no delay as I'm mixing my beats. So how would I use some of this outboard gear to incorporate while I'm mixing? Let's say this Ruby, what is this, the Amplifier 63 right here. This actually sounds really good. Later on, I'll do a video on some of my favorite pedals from UAD, but I'm gonna go ahead and hook this up. Now this Amplifier 63 is actually sounds really good for parallel processing. So say I want to ride my drums through this Ruby guitar pedal, I go to my console application from UAD and I'm using my cues outputs 1 and 2 to actually use these cues outputs, physical outputs 1 and 2 on the back of the Apollo going into this Ruby Amplifier 63. So now what happens is if I send a cue 1 and I crank this up, whereas my drums, I'm gonna solo my drums and I'll actually hit play. If I send Q1 and I crank up Q1, now we're starting to get signal into the guitar pedal and we can see the output of the guitar pedal coming into this outputs or inputs 7 and 8 on the console. And now we're not hearing any processing because I have the fader all the way down, but if I start cranking this up, we're going to start hearing the process signal of that guitar pedal. I'm only going to solo the guitar pedal, so we're just listening to the Amplifier 63 right now. This does sound crushed and distorted, but I'm going to use this for parallel processing, which there is no delay. I'm actually going to get everything in phase, but this actually sounds really nice. You can start coming up with some creative sounds. That sounds awesome. Now we're getting like a room, like there's like a reverb, a short tail reverb. That sounds like your drums are in a room. You're starting to put dimension into your mix. Yeah. I mean, out of all these guitar pedals from UAD, this has got to be one of my favorite ones. You got a little bit of reverb right here, options, and you also have some crazy sounding like parallel processing for distortion and adding some grit to your drums. Now, we have that right there, but if we start blending that in with our drums, it starts to give like a really good smack. And then we put that into the mix. Now, without the guitar pedal, so it's these small touches that you're adding to the mix that makes a big difference. You're probably listening to this and like, man, I can't really hear the difference, but It's those small, subtle changes that I'm telling you is gonna make a big difference at the end of your overall mix, especially after you master it. Now let's actually bring in this lead synthesizer. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's very roomy, but if we start bringing the guitar pedal down a bit. Yeah. Again, you're starting to add dimension to your mix. Your mix is not just everything is right in your face. You use some of these pieces of outboard gear. Now, this is not a video reviewing these individual guitar pedals, but my idea here is incorporating different pieces of outboard gear for longevity. Like in the future, if you're like, you know what, I want to try a guitar amp to run my drums through those guitar amps, you can bring those in, and the MPC gives you the tools that you need to start using these pieces of outboard gear. Let's actually say we want to use, let's actually try a different guitar pedal. I'm actually going to bring in this Dream Amplifier 65. And if I want to send, let's say, this lead synthesizer to the reverb of this Dream 65, I can send it out through Q1, and we should start getting it over here. If I solo the guitar pedal, we're just listening to the guitar pedal by itself. There's like a tremolo right here. That is so cool. Okay, we're gonna bring that in right here. So my main idea here is, yes, you could sample on an MPC, you could sequence on an MPC, you could technically make beats on an MPC all day long. But here's the thing, if you're just getting started, you have a beat, focus on making beats, that's great, there's nothing wrong with that. But there comes a point where you want to start making your beat sound great. You want to start polishing the sound design of your drums, of your samples, of your bass. And when you use plugins, the plugins are great that AKAI has to offer, but when you want to explore and come out of the box, you could definitely do so with certain pieces of hardware that AKAI is pretty much giving you those outputs. And they're saying, hey, you do whatever you feel like doing. You could use anything you want. And at this point, the sky is the limit. There's no complaining on, I wish we had this, I wish we had that. I much rather have no plugins from AKAI, but 8 outputs and 8 inputs, because I much rather use pieces of hardware if I could get guitar pedals versus plugins. Why? Because it just feels different. You could hit it a lot harder and get away with it versus plugins. I am showing this with the console application from UAD, which is awesome, is powerful. I didn't even get into half of what I wanted to talk about. I know not everybody has a UAD Apollo, and these are pretty pricey. Let's face it, like, this is not something anybody's just gonna go ahead and pick up. I've done videos on disregarding the console application or the interface or any other pieces of hardware. Again, if you guys want to see how I do this setup with the guitar pedals without using any other pieces of gear, make sure you watch this video. I'll leave a link somewhere up here. You guys go ahead and hang out with me on that video. From then, I'll catch you guys on our next video. Peace, much love. I'll see you guys next time.